Murray Edridge has been the Wellington City Missioner since May 2018. Murray is the 12th City Missioner in the 119-year history of the organisation. Murray has worked with children and families throughout New Zealand for over 20 years, coming from a commercial background as a chartered accountant. His initial professional career was in a variety of industries, including energy distribution and retail, media, and education. He was the Chief Executive of Barnardos, New Zealand for over 8 years, and then worked in central government as a Deputy Chief Executive in the Ministry of Social Development for over 5 years. Prior to joining the Wellington City Mission, Murray was the inaugural Chief Executive of Genesis Youth Trust, an organisation operating under a social impact bond and working with youth offenders and their whanau in a number of communities in South and East Auckland. Murray has had governance and leadership roles in a range of community, church and sporting organisations for many years and maintains a keen interest in fitness, all sporting endeavours and many DIY activities. Ooh, you could tell us about those. Married to Alison for 38 years, they have 3 grown-up children and a 20-month-old grandson, 3 dogs, and live in Paraparaumu. Wow, very cool. So I'll hand over to you, Murray, to chat to us for half an hour or so. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Tēnā koutou, tēnā te mihi atu ki e tātou e hui mai nei. I o ka rangatira ana hui wha ki te mihi ki e koutou, no mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. You know, you've already heard a bit about who I am, and I'll talk a wee bit about some of that stuff and about the Wellington City Mission here. Hopefully it's interesting, and if there's things you'd like to ask me, then I'm very happy to answer those questions a bit later on in our session. Kirsten has told you that I'm the Wellington City Missioner. In fact, today is my 5-year anniversary. So today is the day I celebrate having spent 5 years in this place. And when I look back over those 5 years, it's been a bit of a journey, a bit of an adventure. And I'll tell you a wee bit about that later on. Firstly, a wee bit about me. I'm a born and bred Wellingtonian. And having travelled quite extensively, I've always come back here to Wellington. Love Wellington. I grew up in Wainuiamata, a little town you all know just over the hill. I describe myself as having a privileged childhood, and by that I don't mean we had a whole lot of things. What I do mean is that I was born into a family where I knew I was loved and wanted. And I've realised in my subsequent work with children and families that that isn't always the case. I was taught the value of hard work. I was taught to not take myself too seriously, which has always been a good attribute. And lastly, I guess, I was taught that everybody is deserving of my time and of my respect. And hopefully that's reflected itself in the work that I do. If I look back over a career now that's lasted in excess of 40 years, actually. I started work in 1982, actually, following a university degree. And if I think about the things that have defined that, it's an interesting journey for me. I had 3, I guess, major career changes in that time. I spent the first 20 years doing commercial work as a chartered accountant. I then had a bit of an epiphany of sorts in 2001. And I'll tell you a wee bit about that story. I went on a school camp with my daughter and discovered to my surprise that the vast majority of the children who were on that camp didn't have dads active in their lives. Now, either I was naive or I hadn't paid attention, but that was a huge surprise to me. So I thought, I've got to do something about this. So I decided I needed a role that enabled me to respond to that need as I saw it in families throughout the country. And I got a job with Barnardos and then became the chief executive of Barnardos, New Zealand. It was kind of like my dream job, really. It was the perfect opportunity to contribute to my community in a way that was meaningful and to do something of value in the lives of those who were struggling for all sorts of reasons. And I did that for about 9 years, or nearly 9 years. But I then came to my second change, which was I went and worked for central government. I never intended to be a public servant. I probably wasn't a great public servant. But I'd spent most of my time in Barnardos complaining in private mainly, but sometimes publicly, about how hard it was to work with government and that the government community connection wasn't as good as it should be and could be. And so the government invited me in to fix it. And I ended up in this very senior position in government as the Deputy Chief Executive of the largest government agency at the time, the Ministry of Social Development, and offered the opportunity to do something about how did we fix this relationship between the community and government. I don't think I did fix it. I think I did some things that helped. And I lasted in that role for about 5 years, just 5.5 years. And then left government. It was time for me to go. I struggled with the bureaucracy of government and the accountability to ministers and a lot of the work that's done that didn't feel to me to be adding sufficient value. I jokingly say I got sacked from government. That's not entirely true, but I left very, very quickly as a consequence of a number of things, and but made sure that when I left government, I maintained the relationships I had with ministers, with government officials, with some of my peers and colleagues who were the head of government agencies. And I've used those relationships ever since. And I then, as you heard, did a wee stint in South Auckland and East Auckland, working with some very difficult situations with young people who had experienced some difficulties in their lives, were facing challenges in the criminal justice system, and working to say, how did we start to change their trajectory of their journeys so that, in fact, for them and hopefully for future generations of their families, they got different outcomes. And so you're starting to see a pattern here, I guess, of my work focus and my work priorities, which is about how do we help people who are struggling. And then came my kind of third major change, which was into a faith organisation, which is the Wellington City Mission, as I say, 5 years ago today. And when I'd left government, I'd accepted the opportunity and the invitation to be part of the governance, part of the board of the Wellington City Mission. But because I was spending time in Auckland, hadn't attended any board meetings. And then someone suggested that I might like to apply for the job of City Missioner. And for the previous 20 years, the Wellington City Mission had operated with 2 people in charge, a chief executive and a city missioner. First time they'd done that in the organisation's history. And then the board had made a decision to bring those roles back together again. And so I was convinced that I should apply for this role, and I got appointed to this role as Wellington City Missioner. And as you heard from Kirsten, I'm the 12th Wellington City Missioner, and at the time was the first to be appointed who wasn't ordained as an Anglican priest. That created a bit of challenge and debate at the time. And although it was never in the plan, I've subsequently become an Anglican priest over recent months and become ordained in the early part of this year. If I reflect back to 1982, when I first started work, back in the day, there was the conventional wisdom that one needed to have a 5, 10, 15, and perhaps 20-year career plan. What were you going to do? How are you going to go about doing it? What were you seeking to achieve? I could never get my head around that, and whether it was I didn't pay enough attention at the time, or whether it wasn't a meaningful exercise for me. But for whatever reason, I couldn't get that career plan sorted. when I was appointed as the Wellington City Missioner 5 years ago, I had time to pause and look back at a career at that stage of about 37 years and thought, that's the perfect preparation for the job I'm about to do. Now, why is that? Because I had this rather ad hoc career, both commercially and in the community sector, and then with government, unplanned as it were, but great opportunities, and hopefully I took advantage of them at the time. And if I look back, you can say, well, was that good planning? Well, maybe, probably not. Good luck, possibly. Or maybe there was some divine intervention and there was some inspiration for me to have gone this path, so I could end up in what arguably is my perfect job. And I've had the opportunity to have a few perfect jobs. And I'm looking at this job as being the last major job I have, and I'm halfway through it 5 years down. I see myself doing another 5 years or so before it's time I retired and spent time with my grandchildren, and hopefully there's more than one by then, of course, my grandchildren and the dogs and the family. Can I say not in that order? I should say the family, the grandchildren and the dogs. So let me tell you a wee bit about the Wellington City Mission. I inherited this thing 5 years ago that was extraordinary. It had been around for 114 years. So formed in 1904 by St. Peter's Church in Willow Street in Wellington here. Formed in response to community need and the idea that the church had to have a response to that. And what was that going to be in very practical terms? For the last now 119 years, the City Mission has served the people of the Wellington region. And the region goes up to the base of the Rimatakas and out to Eastbourne and Wainuiomata, up through the Porirua Basin and out as bad as roughly to the Otaki River. So that's the boundary line. So it's kind of the bottom chunk of the North Island. And we serve in a whole lot of different ways in that space, really focused around community services and residential services. And when you look back over that 119 years of incredible history, and we've got this hugely privileged place to stand now where people trust us, people acknowledge the contribution the City Mission has made, and yet they don't really know what we do. They just know we do good things. But if I reflect back over those 119 years, I see the organisation adjust and evolve and morph into different shapes according to what the community needs at the time. And that's a really important thing for us to consider, because some things don't change and some things do. And a big part of my job is determining what does this community need from us now and next year and in 5 years' time, and how might we respond to that effectively? Because, of course, there are some things that don't change. One of the things I do often when I speak in community groups is I read them a housing report, or an extract from a housing report written by the Wellington City Council. And when I say to people, does that ring true? People say, yes, that's what our housing situation is. And then I reflect on the fact that that report was written in 1906. So some things don't change. Some of the need in our communities don't change, but our response to them must, because our circumstances are different. So if I think about what the City Mission does, and how we then respond to those needs, we have a vision in the City Mission. It talks about three things. It talks about empowerment, it talks about transformation, and it talks about fullness of life. What do they mean? Well, in the terms that I explain them anyway, empowerment is about the dignity of choice, because you and I have dignity in our lives because we have choices. We choose what we eat and when we eat and where we eat. We choose where we live. We choose what we do with our disposable income. We choose what we do with our leisure time. Imagine life without any of those choices. It's pretty grim, and there's not much joy in that, and there's not much dignity in that. Transformation is our second part of our vision. And transformation I describe as the hope that life can be different than it is at the moment. Because if you're doing life really, really hard, then you need to be able to envisage or imagine a life that's better than that, that's different than that, because that gives you the ability to live through each day and to go on and improve your circumstances, or be open to other people helping you improve your circumstances. And then the third thing, of course, is fullness of life. And it's a fascinating concept, because if I had the opportunity to ask each one of you what fullness of life looked like, you would each describe it differently. You'd describe the things that are important to you, the things you're passionate about, the things that bring you joy. And that will be different for everyone. But the two questions I pose, one hard and one easy. The easy one first is, should everyone have the opportunity to live into fullness of life for themselves? And the obvious answer is yes, of course. The second question, though, which is harder, is what responsibility do you and I take for ensuring that everyone has that opportunity to live into fullness of life for themselves? And that's a tougher question, isn't it? It's a question about how do we think about our response to the community? How do we think about those in our community who don't necessarily look like us, who don't have what we have? And how might we respond to them? How might we serve them well? I wanted to tell you about a few initiatives that have happened in the Wellington City Mission over the last 5 years, or things that we're going to do now. The first, and it's something you may have heard about, is our social supermarket. We founded the social supermarket just over 2 years ago on the 15th of March, 2021. And the social supermarket was a response to us being a very large food bank and supplying the food needs of people who are at a point of extraordinary need or desperation. And it always struck me when I thought about our food bank that people come to us needing food and they're under pressure, they're ashamed potentially of their circumstance, they're feeling pretty grim about life, and that the fact that they can't provide for themselves and their family. And we give them a box or a bag of food that may contain items that they don't like, don't know how to cook, don't know what to do with. And it just felt like we weren't treating them with as much dignity as we could. And I suspect some of that food, of course, was wasted. So the response then is, well, how should we serve people who come to us with a food need? And the answer was to give them what you and I might enjoy, which is being able to shop for oneself in a local supermarket and being able to choose what we want for ourselves and our family. So we set up the social supermarket, and it's been the most amazing experience. We've had people that come in and are overwhelmed with the fact that they're offered the ability to choose whatever they want at no cost. And it's a dignified experience. And we have a supermarket just next door to me here. It's not our finished one, and I'll tell you about that a bit later, but we have about 3,000 items in that supermarket. We have budget products, we have premium products, we have top-end beef and mince and sausages and all sorts of wonderful things. And they're available to anyone who particularly needs them. And you can come here initially without questions as to your circumstances. But then over time, if you want to be a regular shopper, we want to engage more because we can help you with things. We can help you with your, we've got social workers, we've got financial mentors, budget advisors, we've got parenting experts, people that can help you with some of the things that are going on potentially in your household. Because when we have a food challenge, it's very seldom just a food challenge. It's a family that's struggling. Another initiative, and it's one that got changed when we went into COVID lockdown in March 2020, is our community lounge. We call it Tāti Manawa, which means where the heart breathes. And it used to be a food service where people would come in and queue up for a meal, be fed, and they would leave. And what we discovered over COVID lockdown in 2020 was that actually people got fed. What they didn't get was a sense of community. And so we changed the lounge, we changed the furniture, we painted and decorated. We put soft chairs rather than tables and chairs, put new lights in and made it a beautiful space and invited people back in as a community lounge. And it's become the most wonderful place where some people come and spend all day. They get fed still, there's lots of food, but they're served at their table in the most dignified way we can do. There is beautiful coffee made by a volunteer barista. And it's a fantastic place where people can come and connect with other people in their community. Because one of the things we know is that social isolation is one of the most challenging things that people have to cope with. In addition to the supermarket and the lounge, we've been doing a significant lot of transitional housing. And we now have 3 transitional housing sites, one of them based as part of our rest home and hospital at Te Tahi Bay, that's Kemp Home and Hospital. One based in a 19-bedroom property in Petone. We call that Tipa Manawa. And what we call Tipa Puri, which is a building in Wellington in Torrey Street, known to most people as the Zebra Building. And we've been operating that building for 2 years. And we have 83 apartments in that building, beautiful apartments. Just prior to COVID, the building got refurbished as a boutique hotel. And as befits a boutique hotel, the rooms are beautiful. They're beautifully fitted out. They have high-end kitchens. They have beautiful oversized bathrooms, all tiled and beautifully presented. Lovely high stud in the building with ornate scotias. It really is a beautiful space. And having operated it for nearly 2 years now with a group of people who have a lot of challenges. Some of them will have very serious addictions. Some of them have got criminal records and significant histories, some for violence, a very difficult cohort. But one of the cool parts of the story is that in those 2 years, we've had virtually no damage in that building. That doesn't align with the cohort of people that we house there. But it reminds us once again, if you treat people with dignity and respect, they reciprocate in kind. Our transitional housing isn't just about housing people, it's about helping people on their journey. And so you can't just come and stay with us and not work with us on the things that got you there in the first place. So we work with our guests, our manuhiri as we call them, on things like addictions, physical and mental health, reconnection with family and community, access into work, and of course, ultimately, we place them into permanent housing in the community. It's a real privilege to be able to do that. There's a couple of building sites that I want to tell you about. The first is 304 Taranaki Street, previously known as the Wellington Men's Night Shelter. Built in 1969 by one of my predecessors as a night shelter for men with a challenge with alcohol. We've got access to that building. It was gifted to us after we took responsibility for it over COVID 2020. And we've done a major refurbishment. And if you've driven past 304 Taranaki Street in recent times, you will have seen it covered in scaffolding and wrapped in plastic. It's about to be unveiled. And what will come out of that, that plastic is a beautiful 18-bedroom en-suited facility with multiple living and dining areas, outdoor areas, meeting spaces and staff areas. And our intention is to run a service in that space for people that struggle with an alcohol addiction, not as a night shelter, but as a long-term residential service that supports people who otherwise have nowhere else to go because of their addictions. So watch this space, because that will happen over the next few months. The other building site we have is at 4 Oxford Terrace, which, if you don't know where it is just up from the Basin Reserve in Wellington. Backs onto Government House. So we've got good neighbours. We call it Whakamaru, which is a name that was gifted to us by Mana Whenua, which means to shelter, to nurture, to safeguard. And that building will become the home of the City Mission on the date of our 120-year anniversary, which is August 2024. So we've got another 14 months or so before that building's completed. That building, in addition to our offices, will contain 35 residential apartments for people who need a bit of extra support before they can live independently in the community. It'll also have a community cafe, which is a bit like our community lounge, but on a bigger scale, with 120 seats, which is a big cafe. But an opportunity, in addition to the people that we currently serve, to invite members of the public in, like you and I, where you get fantastic coffee, you get great food, probably for whatever price you choose to pay for it. But most of all, and best of all, you get to sit next to someone who doesn't look like you, who doesn't have what you have. And together we'll discover each other, and hopefully that changes our community. Because the intention of Whakamaru is to create a community where there's no us and them. And in that way, we start to learn how to care for ourselves. In addition to the cafe and the accommodation, we're going to have a commercial laundry. We're going to have a brand new social supermarket, which is modelled on the one we have next door here in Newtown. We're going to have a conference venue. We're going to have a medical centre. And we're building a chapel that'll be open 24/7, 365 days a year. Probably the only church we think in Wellington that will be open all of that time. And it's an opportunity for us to serve the needs of the community, because the building will be alive all of the time. So 24/7, we'll be able to serve the communities of Wellington. So they're really exciting things. But you know, one of the things we talk about a lot in this place is not just what we do, but how we do it. Because at the end of the day, buildings are buildings. The activities we do are important, but they're just activities. What's really important is, how do we treat people? And our commitment is that we treat everyone with dignity, with respect, and without judgment, irrespective of how they present themselves to us, irrespective of what they say, of what they do, of how they behave, of what they have or don't have. We will treat them with dignity, with respect, and without judgment. And that's become an incredibly important mantra for us. And let's be clear, our objective as an organisation ultimately is not to need to exist. And that would be fantastic when one day we could close our doors and go home because we don't need to be here. But there's no evidence that that's going to happen anytime soon. And in fact, it's getting harder and harder in our communities. And we've been talking to government and decision makers and to council about the years we have ahead of us, about 2023 and about 2024, which I think are going to be the toughest years many people have ever faced, because of the impacts of COVID, because of the impacts of the economic challenges, because of the cost of housing, which continues to be a major challenge that we see in almost all of our situations we deal with. And there's no immediate relief in sight. So our communities are doing life hard at the moment. And again, we're reminded that we stand here in this privileged space with an opportunity to serve people and to help people where they are. And we take that responsibility seriously. Father Greg Boyle made a quote recently, and he said, we've all faced the same COVID storm, but some of us have been in ocean liners, and some of us have been in inner tubes, and some of us have been hanging on to pieces of driftwood. And isn't that the reality? We've all faced the same COVID storm, but our ability to respond to that and to meet the challenges of it are impacted by what we have and our circumstances and the things around us. And so I guess my job has become talking to people in the community about what others need and what others are facing, so that as a community we can respond to that collectively, so that we can take care of everyone who exists in our community. What a privilege it is to be able to do that work and be able to serve the community in the way we do. I want to finish with one of my favourite quotes, and it comes from William Carey, who some of you will recognise as a stalwart of missionary service and the Baptist movement. He was the first of the British missionaries into India, and he happens to be a relative of mine. And he had this lovely quote, which sits on the wall above my desk, which says, "I'm not afraid of failure. I'm afraid of succeeding at things that don't matter. I'm not afraid of failure. I'm afraid of succeeding at things that don't matter." The work we do, I think, in the City Mission does matter. And what a privilege it is to be able to serve other people in the way we do. I'm going to pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions you've got. Thank you for listening to me for the last half an hour. I hope that's of some value and of interest to you.
Wow. Thanks so much, Murray. That was awesome. Yeah. So if anyone has a question, could you type it into the chat, which is down the bottom of your screen, and we'll ask Murray some of those. But I was just going to make a comment about the social supermarket. My friend Annette, who also works for City Mission as a social worker and has been there probably, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years, a long time. She was the first person that told me about that 2 years ago, just before it opened. And I remember thinking, that is the most amazing idea I've ever heard. It's so fantastic to give people the dignity of going and choosing what they get to eat for the week. And she told me all about, back then, I don't know how it's working now, but the point system, and and also giving choice. You're giving responsibility to people to choose things that are useful for the family. Maybe not 4 packets of toffee pops or something, but a bag of flour and whatever. So I just thought it was such a great idea, and I'm seeing that other people are kind of picking up on that idea as well and doing things maybe not exactly the same, but quite similarly. And I helped out with something at the Sally Army at Christmas time, and it was the same kind of idea of being able to go along and choose your things that you need for the week ahead. So yeah, well done. So it's such a good thing. And I was just going to ask a question about the Taranaki Street service you're about to kick off. Is that for men and women?
Thank you, Kirsten. Let me comment on both, because it's worth just, again, thinking about the social supermarket. There's now 5 of them in New Zealand. They all came out of the one here in Wellington. And when people come to look at it, and we get inundated with visitors and people that want to see how it works, I always say to them, don't try and do this in your space. Take the ideas and the concepts and work out what fits in your context, in your community. And so we've seen them established in Kaitaia, in Tokoroa, and Whangarei, and now Tauranga. And they're all slightly different because they model the community that they're there to serve. It is such a cool thing. And I mean, the temptation I have is to go and watch shoppers, which I shouldn't do, but there's such joy in people having the experience sometimes, or very often for the first time, where they can choose whatever they want and they aren't bound by the things that normally bind them up. We do have a points process, which is just they get a number of points because we all shop within certain parameters, and they get a points total allocated to them based on the size of their family, and they can spend up to that amount of points. There's no prices in the supermarket, just points. And what's important to note is that there's at least 2 items in the social supermarket that is 0 rated for points. One of those is pet food, and we have a lot of pet food in there for dogs and cats. And of course, if you have a pet, they're part of your family, so we should provide for them. But you shouldn't have to limit the amount you shop because of that, so we 0 rate that. And the other product we 0 rate is female hygiene products, because again, it's a very necessary thing and seems important that we put no barriers in place in terms of people's access to those products. So those things are 0 rated. So it's a very cool thing. Let me talk about Taranaki Street. It will be both men and women, depending on the need that we see. We'll probably start with men because that's an area we're more familiar with, but we will open it up in due course, and we intend to have both genders in that service. If you have a serious alcohol problem, and by that I mean, you cannot or will not, for whatever reason, stop drinking, then there is nowhere for you to go, because most of the services, most of the accommodation, all of the accommodation requires you to be dry, sober or abstinent, and for some people that's not a reality. So Wellington's had this kind of vision for a long time, and it's never happened. This is the first of its kind in the country, and we hope it's going to be successful. It's going to be challenging, but we're providing, again, the most beautiful facilities and ensuring that by offering people the best we can, hopefully their journey becomes easier.
Cool. Okay, thanks for that. We've got a couple of questions. One of them is from Stephen, my boss, actually. He says, thanks very much, Murray. What role do volunteers play at the City Mission?
Great question, Stephen. Thank you for that. At the moment, we have about 120 active volunteers, and they work primarily here in Newtown, either in the social supermarket or in the community lounge. And we have a few volunteers that work in our transitional housing services. They're our regular volunteers. Of course, we have people that come in on specific occasions around Christmas and other things. The interesting thing is that we have a big waiting list for volunteers who want to come and help here, but we just don't have the facilities. And part of that is because we're operating in our community services Monday to Friday, 9 to 4:30. Of course, all of our residential services are 24/7. Consequently, when we move to Whakamaru in August next year, we will be operating 24/7 for everything. And down in Whakamaru, we've estimated there are 26 different roles for volunteers, and you'll be able to do those roles almost any hour of the day or night, any day of the week. And so the volunteer workforce we're going to seek to recruit between now and August 2024 is we're looking for 1,200 volunteers. Now, that might sound like a lot of people, and it is. But hey, what a neat opportunity to be able to come and connect with your community. And 1,200 volunteers is not just a workforce, which clearly it represents to us, but also an opportunity for the community to learn and understand how to care for itself. So if we can get that many people involved in their own ways, serving the community at points of need, then we think there's real value in that. So volunteers are critical to us. They are the most wonderful people because they give us the best they've got at no cost, and that's awesome. The interesting thing is when we thank our volunteers, and we try and do that regularly, almost always they say, we feel guilty about this because we get more out of the experience than we think we give. And that's generally what we hear from volunteers, which is awesome.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, Age Concern in Wellington wouldn't exist without our volunteers. So
absolutely, yeah.
They make a huge impact. Here's another one from Anne Barr. Given the positive change from social supermarkets, how does this impact the level of donations to support your work now that food banks are not at our local, or food bank bins are not at our local supermarket?
I mean, the difference for us now is we're operating a supermarket, so we need to keep the shelves full all the time, which is different than a food bank where you give out whatever you get. We still get a lot of donations of food from the general public, and they're awesome. And it means we get a variety of products we can offer in the supermarket. But we also have big relationships with some of the corporates, some of the producers and suppliers, some of the supermarket chains who are very generous in their support of us, because we couldn't exist without the supermarkets. They help us out with this thing. Once a week, we get a truck down from the Hora Whenua that brings us fresh fruit and veggies, which is awesome. And we buy food, and because we have to run the supermarket. And so when we buy food, we buy it through a wholesaler, that's Gilmore's, which is part of the Foodstuffs group. But Gilmore's incredibly generous to us because we buy it at their cost price. So we're buying food where a grocery wholesaler buys food. And that's amazing because we can get way better value for what we spend. So private and community donations are incredibly important, both in food and, of course, in money, because money is always helpful for us to be able to support the initiative.
Yeah, money is always helpful. Not a truer word has been said. So Margaret says, wonderful work there, Murray, via the City Mission. Is there a danger that such good work gives our government an excuse to opt out? Compare with ambulance and rescue services, and also how do you make people of other faiths or no faith feel comfortable and that they belong?
Thank you, Margaret, first for the acknowledgement and wonderful questions. Now, 2 questions. I'll take the second one first. We're really clear, although we're a faith-led, faith-centered organisation that came out of the Anglican Church, our job is not to sell our faith or evangelise in any way. People of all faiths or no faith at all are welcome in this place and will be treated with the dignity and respect and lack of judgment that others are as well. We're really clear when we open our new chapel in Whakamaru that it'll be a sacred space, but a sacred space that's open to anyone of any faith or of no faith at all, which will just be a beautiful place to be. So we're really clear. We make no judgments, and you know, if people want faith-based services or services with a faith element, we can offer that. But actually, that's not our main job here. Our main job is to serve the community, whatever their gender, their sexual orientation, their faith, their ethnicity. None of those things matter in our space. First question was a great one, which is letting government off the hook, because there's things that government should pay for. I agree with you that there's things that government should pay for, and we've got to be careful we don't do it for them. Part of the benefit for me of being a senior public servant previously is I have very good relationships in government, and I push government really, really hard. One of the things we do is advocate. We advocate for individuals, and we advocate in a way that we call systemic, which is for changes in our community. And part of that is talking to politicians and to senior government officials about how they respond to the needs in the community. So I get access to, for example, the finance minister, who happens to be my local MP as well, which is awesome because I can tell him what I think he needs to know about what community need looks like. A good example recently is we went to visit the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, because the transitional housing services we are offering now are way harder than the things we contracted for back a few years ago when we established that relationship. And we said, look, we're not going to not do these things. We just need more help to do them. We need more support to do them. And they were very open and willing to engage in that conversation. So we push government quite hard, and we make sure that they take responsibility for the things that they take responsibility for. But there's lots of need out there. So everything we and government can do is really important.
That's great. And Lorna, my colleague, is asking, how do you keep up with all the changes and initiatives going on in your organisation? There seems to be so much.
Yeah, that's probably a question better directed to my team, because I thrive on this stuff, and my team are often in despair about the number of ideas we have. And I guess I like change, not for change's sake, but because if we can do things better, then that's good for the community. Some years ago when Mike Moore died, well, in recent years, Mike Moore, the ex-Prime Minister, died. And in one of the eulogies, they said Mike Moore had 100 ideas a day. 99 of them were stupid and one was really good. I figure that's not a bad average. If I could have one good idea a day, that's awesome. So I'm really inspired by what I do here. Doesn't feel like a job, it feels like a privilege. And you know, we constantly saying, can we do things better? The beauty of having those 3 criteria about dignity, respect, and treating people without judgment means that we're constantly assessing what we do to say, are we living into those criteria the best way we can? And very seldom have we got it so good that we can't improve it. So it's constantly thinking about not only what we do, but about how we do it, and is it good enough? And I've got a very supportive family who look after me when I get a bit excited about these things.
Yeah, no, that's good. And you know, that kind of makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it? Being able to go home to your 3 dogs. Yes. And the family. 3 dogs. That's a lot of dogs in one
There's
house.
a bit of a story behind that, but I won't tell you today.
Oh dear. Oh, well, we just want to thank you so much, Murray, for spending nearly an hour with us on a busy Monday. Just a couple of things I was going to congratulate you on. One is on being there for 5 years. Well done. And that's kind of cool that we get to spend some time with you on the day of your 5th year. And the other thing is on becoming an Anglican priest, because that's a whole lot of hard work to get to that point, and to be doing it in the midst of being the city missioner as well. You've done a good job. Now they're going to get you preaching down the road, probably at St. Paul's or something.
We're having those conversations.
Yeah. They're going to add to your workload. But yeah, thanks so much. A boy from Wainuiomata has come a long way. So not geographically a long way, but it's you've done very well. So we just want to thank you so much for spending the time with us, and we look forward to seeing what happens next. And yeah, just get a hold of us if you need anything, with older people or seniors. We've got lots of good ideas here too. So yeah, good to collaborate.
Well, thank you, Kirsten, and thank you all of you who have persevered throughout the last half an hour. So I hope it's been of value to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Murray.